Hello, everyone. My name is Emily. I'm 20 years old, and I live with my father and stepmother. I also have a brother named Jack, who my stepmother brought home. Despite the fact that I have a new family and my father remarried, I didn't give it much thought at the time because everything went smoothly even though we had just recently moved in together. My stepmother and Jack both loved me very much and were always there to help me and talk to each other, which made me feel warm and happy. I thought we would have a peaceful life like that every morning. The whole family had breakfast together. My stepmother prepared the food, and my father always sat next to me asking about the little things in life. Jack never made me feel strange. He was always attentive, helping me with everything from studying to small things in the family. Even though we had just started living together, I really felt loved, and there was nothing to worry about. We even watched movies together, talked together, and everything was wonderful. I couldn't think of anything else but those peaceful moments. My father was a serious man but loved his family very much, and my stepmother. Also, though she was new, always took good care of me as if she were my real mother. Jack was the same. He treated me very well and there was nothing to worry about. Life went on smoothly like that, and I believed that we would always be happy. One day I began to realize that something was wrong, a strange change that I couldn't immediately explain. It was a small thing, but it left me with a lingering feeling that day. I went to the bathroom as usual without thinking much, but in my haste I forgot to lock the bathroom door as usual. Not for the first time, I thought I could rest assured, because I was the only one in the house while I was taking a shower. I suddenly heard the bathroom door open slightly. I was startled, quickly turned around, but not before the door opened wider and I saw John standing there. His eyes at that moment were no longer the kind, close eyes. As before, it was cold and strange, as if he had just witnessed something wrong or as if he didn't know what to do with himself. He quickly turned away, but a second before he was gone, I saw in his eyes a look of awkwardness and confusion. At that moment, I didn't understand what was happening. I just felt like I was stuck in an inexplicable moment. I hurriedly finished my work and got out of the bathroom, but the strange feeling didn't go away. I kept asking myself, did I do something wrong, or was there something between me and him that had changed, that hadn't noticed? After that day, things began to change so gradually that I couldn't immediately notice at first. Those changes seemed so small, so subtle that I thought I was just being oversensitive. JN was the same as always, but there seemed to be something different in his eyes every time he looked at me. At first, I didn't pay much attention, thinking that maybe I was imagining things. But then I began to feel this change more clearly when he looked at me. His eyes no longer had the kindness and closeness. Like before, I couldn't say exactly what was different, but there was a strange feeling, as if he was looking at me. Not as his sister anymore. His eyes swept over me, no longer affectionate, no longer the warm gaze that I was familiar with. Instead, it seemed to be suppressed, something both strange and difficult to understand. Sometimes he even looked at me strangely, as if he was trying to control something that I didn't understand. At first, I just thought it was because I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining it all. But after a few contacts, those strange feelings were no longer imagination. The way he looked at me began to become clearer. He didn't look at me like before, no longer the warm gaze of an older brother for his younger sister. Instead, there were times when his eyes became strange, as if he was hiding something or as if he was facing an emotion that I couldn't explain. Not only did his eyes change, his actions also began to change. He talked to me less. Before, we used to talk frequently, sharing everything from trivial things to serious stories, but now our conversations had become brief, even sparse. When I tried to start a conversation, he only answered vaguely, then goes silent, as if he was trying to avoid me. Especially when we sat down to eat together. I clearly felt an invisible wall gradually being built between us. He no longer took the initiative to sit next to me, no longer laughed and joked like before. Everything became tense, like a strange atmosphere was surrounding us. I thought it would just be a short while, then everything would pass and return to its original orbit, but no. That night, everything changed completely. That night, when my parents were away, I felt an unnamed anxiety rising in my heart. The whole house was quiet. Only Jack and I were left. It was a night when everything seemed to be different. I sat in my room trying to solve a problem that I couldn't understand. In fact, I had been trying to do it all afternoon, but I got nowhere at that moment. All I could think about was asking my brother I didn't want to bother him because there was a vague distance between us that I couldn't explain, but it was a problem. I couldn't solve myself, and I had no other choice. I stood up, worried, wondering if John would be as willing to help me as he had been before. Every time I thought of him, I felt a certain distance, as if he was trying to avoid me, but I decided to go out and go to his room. The feeling of confusion made me want to go back, but I knew that if I didn't ask him, I wouldn't be able to solve the problem. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on his door. "Come in." John's voice rang out from inside. I swallowed and opened the door. Stepping in with somewhat heavy feet, he looked up at me from the desk, his eyes suddenly becoming strange, no longer the usual kindness and warmth. However, he did not show any discomfort, but only asked a very simple question. "What's the matter?" I pursed my lips, hesitated a bit, then explained the reason I have a math problem. "I don't understand. Can you help me?" He nodded, invited me to sit down, and then began to teach. But throughout the process, there was something that made me feel uncomfortable. He spoke very clearly, but sometimes I caught his eyes glancing away as if trying to avoid me. Although he patiently explained step by step, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense and cold. I realized that there was no longer the closeness like before every time he touched the paper or pointed to a point on the problem. I felt an invisible distance, as if he was trying not to get too close to me. When he finally finished helping me with the problem, I was about to stand up to go back to my room, when suddenly my hand was grabbed. I was startled and looked up at him. JN held my hand very firmly. His eyes were no longer cold, but filled with a strange determination. We looked at each other for a moment. Neither of us said anything. My feeling at that moment was hard to describe. My heart beat faster, and I felt like an invisible wall was gradually collapsing between us. "Jack." I called his name softly. My voice choked. I stood there, my heart pounding, my eyes unable to take their eyes off his hand that was tightly holding mine. John looked at me with a cold seriousness, but his eyes were filled with a determination I had never seen before, not the gaze of a brother facing his sister, but the gaze of someone trying to convince me to do something I couldn't understand. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me as if he was thinking about something important. I felt my heart tighten, fear rising little by little, as if I was standing at a crossroads with no way out. Everything in the small room suddenly became stifling heavy. Finally, after a long silence, John spoke softly but very seriously. "Emily, I like you. I can't continue to pretend like everything is normal. I want you to stay with me. I want us to be together." I stood there, unable to believe what I had just heard. Those words, the words my brother had uttered, couldn't possibly be true. I wanted to say something, but my throat was choked, unable to utter a word in that moment. All the memories of him, of my family, of our love suddenly shattered. The feeling of dizziness made me unable to move. I could only stand still, looking at him as if I was in a nightmare that I could not wake up from. JN continued, his voice low, as if he was sharing something deep. "Something I couldn't imagine, Emily. Every night since the night I saw you bathing, I can't stop thinking about you. I know I shouldn't, but I can't stop. I can't stop thinking about you like this. You don't understand, but I want you to stay with me forever." His words were like a slap in the face, snapping me out of my daze. I looked into his eyes, feeling no love, only coldness, strangeness. I wanted to scream, to run away from this room, but my limbs felt like they were nailed to the ground. My brother, the man I loved and trusted, was saying these words, trying to push away the fear that was rising in me. "No, Jack." I exhaled, using all my strength to say no. "Jack, this can't be happening. No, you can't say such things." I tried to pull my hand away from his, but he held it tighter, his eyes darkening as if he couldn't accept my refusal. He remained adamant. "You don't understand, Emily. I want you to stay with me. I can't live without you." I felt like I was suffocating, unable to breathe from the tension in the room. It felt like I was trapped in a situation from which I couldn't escape. Everything around me seemed to lose clarity, and the only sound was my frantic heartbeat. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fear in my heart, and again I spoke louder, more firmly. "Brother, stop this. This is not happening. You can't do this to me." Never suddenly, as if in shock, he let go of my hand, looking at me in shock, as if he had just realized something terrible. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said softly, his voice weak. I didn't I didn't mean to scare you like that." I said nothing, just stood there feeling all the strength drained from me. My heart was in turmoil. I just wanted to get out of this room as quickly as possible. But before I turned to leave, I couldn't help but say one more time, "You need to get help, Jack. This isn't normal. I can't stay if this keeps up." He stood still, saying nothing more. I turned around, walked quickly out of the room, and slammed the door shut. My mind was filled with unanswered questions, and the confusion made it impossible for me to stop thinking about what had just happened. I quickly locked the door to my room, sat down, and held my head, feeling like everything was collapsing around me. How could this happen? How did everything become like this? The questions kept spinning in my head, but there were no answers. I just sat there in the dark room alone, scared and helpless. From that day on, everything changed, and I felt it. Clearly, the relationship between JN and me was no longer the same. Even though we still lived together under the same roof, the closeness, the comfortable conversations, the evenings spent eating together were gone. Instead, there was a vague, heavy distance, like an invisible curtain covering us. After that incident, I didn't dare to look him in the eye anymore. Every time we met, I felt like I was standing on a cliff. Just a slight wind could make me fall down. He no longer took the initiative to talk to me, nor did he ask me questions like before. I even felt that his eyes, when looking at me, had a strange strangeness, like he was looking at someone I couldn't understand day by day. I didn't know what to do to restore this relationship. I still tried to avoid him, as if hoping that time would heal everything. But the more I avoided him, the more I realized that everything was gradually cracking. There was no chance to go back to the way it was before. He never said sorry after everything ended, never once shared or explained his silence. His silence was like a big wound getting deeper and deeper in my heart. There was a part of me that still hoped that everything was just a nightmare. But the more I lived with that silence, the more I realized that we were becoming strangers to each other, like two completely different people. Every time I tried to talk to him, he would just give me a vague answer and then go silent. The stories of the past now became empty spaces that could not be filled. My stepmother had no idea about the changes in my relationship with Jack. She still thought that we simply did not talk to each other for a while, as if it were a normal family affair. There were times when she would ask me sincerely, with a worried look on her face, "Are you two angry with each other? Why don't you talk or have fun?" Like before, I could only laugh it off, saying that it was nothing, just a small matter. But inside, I felt choked up, because I knew very well that there was no such thing as a small matter. Every time she asked, I had to force myself to smile, pretending that everything was fine. I didn't want her to know the truth, because I couldn't explain it. I also didn't know how to tell my stepmother that things had changed, that the relationship between JN and I could never go back to the way it was. Every time she tried to push us to talk, I could only nod or answer vaguely, as if everything was normal. But no matter how hard I tried, I knew deep down that things were no longer the same. Jay's eyes, when looking at me, became increasingly distant, and the silence between us created an irreparable distance. As for my stepmother, even though I didn't know what was going on, I could feel the anxiety in her every question. She didn't understand. But I knew no matter how hard I tried to hide it, things between us had changed to too much. Every time I looked at my stepmother, I felt like I was deceiving her because I couldn't share the truth. She still treated me like a daughter. But in my heart, the insecurity and fear grew even more. Everything became more difficult when I couldn't say what I felt and couldn't go back to the peaceful days of the past. Jack and I were broken, and I knew even if I wanted to, we could never go back to the way things were in the end. I realized that things that cannot be said will gradually kill the relationship between people.
not because we do not want to, but because silence and concealment will create invisible gaps that we cannot fill. Everything in my family has changed, not just because of specific actions, but because of the suffocating silence that JN and I created. Sometimes not speaking makes things worse. We all want to keep our families happy, but when emotions are not shared, when the hurt is not healed, we cannot go back to the way it was. I do not know how long it will take for me to overcome this change, but one thing I am sure of is that I will not be able to live in a family that is only darkness and fear anymore. I need to learn to face my emotions and learn to communicate honestly. I cannot hide forever, cannot live in the lie that everything is okay forever. Our loved ones can sometimes be the ones who hurt us, but if they are not faced and dealt with early, there is no chance of healing. The biggest lesson I learned from this story is never let silence and fear become the reason you have to live with the pain. Emotions will never disappear if we do not dare to face them. Facing, talking about, and finding a solution is always the best way. Even though it is sometimes painful and difficult, only when we can face the truth and accept the pain can we truly heal the wounds in our hearts. Life and relationships are not always perfect. Every family, every person has moments of losing their way, feelings that they cannot share immediately. But if we do not speak up, do not face the problem, we will forever live in fear and pain. Don't allow your loved ones' feelings to be destroyed by silence. Instead, be courageous enough to express them and own up to your mistakes. No matter how painful it may be, remember that when we commit to healing, we are not just our own heroes, but also the heroes of people around us. Thank you for viewing Emily's story. Don't let fear keep you from speaking the truth, since it is what might help you mend your relationship. The tale ends here. I hope to see you in the upcoming films. Have a great day. If you find this story meaningful and intriguing, please remember to like and share it so that everyone may hear it.